Marine pilotage is as old as maritime trade itself, going back as far as recorded history. Among the first official pilots in Canada were those named by the British military in Annapolis Royal in 1719 and by the King of France in 1731 to conduct vessels from the mouth of the St. Lawrence River to Quebec City. When Canada became a country in 1867, the authority to regulate pilotage was vested in the federal government. The Parliament of Canada passed legislation governing pilotage in 1873. In 1906, the legislation concerning pilotage was folded into the Canada Shipping Act, where it remained virtually unchanged, right up to the time the recipient of this evening's award was asked by the government to sort out what had by then become something of a mess. The year was 1962, and the Conservative Party under John Diefenbaker was the government in Ottawa. Marine pilots on the St. Lawrence River were on strike, and pilots elsewhere in the country were threatening to join them. One of Canada's vital maritime arteries was at a near-complete standstill. While service resumed within a week, an agreement to end the strike came only after the government promised to undertake a comprehensive inquiry into pilotage and how it should be organized in Canada. Later that same year, the Minister of Transport, the Honorable Léon Bolsé, announced the establishment of a Royal Commission on Pilotage and the appointment of the Honorable Mr. Justice Yves Bernier of the Quebec Superior Court as chairman of the commission.
Because I was a conservative at the end of my first year as judge, I received a telephone call from Minister Balsé asking me to be the chairman of the Royal Commission on Pilotage. He said, and I quote, "It won't take long, only 6 months."
The idea that the Royal Commission on Pilotage could complete its work in 6 months was quickly proven to be wildly unrealistic. In the end, the Commission did not submit its main report until 1968, 6 years after it had begun its work. The final volume of the report was handed to the government in 1971, 9 years after Justice Bernier began his inquiry. The government chose well. Justice Bernier turned out to be the ideal chairman for a protracted inquiry into a complicated subject.
Judge Bernier was my law professor in 1962-1963. That was my first contact with him. Years later, when I was appointed to the Quebec Court of Appeal, I sat on the bench for 5 years with Justice Bernier. He was a modest and reserved man, but he was indefatigable, examining every detail. No rock was left unturned. Justice Bernier had a very approachable demeanor. He always made himself available to everyone. He had a remarkable objectivity. He always said, "It's the evidence that counts."
I have had the privilege of acting as counsel for the St. Lawrence River pilots and the Welland Canal pilots before the Bernier Commission during 1962-63 when the Commission was holding its hearings. Judge Bernier proved to be an extremely hardworking, fair judge who allowed us to present our case as well as the case of the other parties concerned. Showed great patience and extreme attention to all the details of the role and function of the pilots.
The Bernier report did not disappoint. It was comprehensive. It enjoyed general support from all stakeholders, and the government was able to turn the main recommendations into legislation that has served the country well and endured for decades. Justice Bernier envisioned a pilotage system that was both independent and accountable, flexible, sensitive to regional considerations, and responsive to user needs. His recommendations formed the basis for a pilotage system that remains second to none in the world.
It was in very great detail. Everything, all the aspects of pilotage were examined, the history up to that point, the safety record, the training of pilots. It was beyond what anybody imagined. It took somebody with great perseverance, a person very meticulous in doing this study, and it became, of course, as we know today, the foundation for a pilotage act.
After all the evidence, it brought out all facets of the pilotage service, including the problems. And Justice Bernier made recommendations as to overcome these problems and what should be done. And as a result of that, I think that a consensus developed, which took a while, but his proposals had a lot to do with the development of a consensus.
Well, the only legislation I can think of that has been around for a long time and has never been changed is the one that dealt with the Halifax explosion, I think in 1917, when I think 2,000 or 3,000 people lost their lives, and a special commission was set up by law in order to deal with the survivors and people who had been injured. And like I said, I can't think of any other legislation that's been around for 40 years that hasn't really been changed. As I said, the only change we had to make was to make sure that the pilots sort of funded their own activities and couldn't go back to Ottawa for money. So Judge Bernier really did a very good job in the 60s and the 70s by proposing legislation, writing all the reports, and making sure that the law got enacted, I think under Trudeau in 1972. And it's been around now for 40 years, and certainly the pilotage authorities are very effective bodies, and we all have to thank Justice Bernier for that.
I'm extremely happy that the Pilots of Canada have taken this occasion, the occasion of this Congress, to honor Judge Bernier. He's deserving every aspect of that honor that one can think of.
I'm quite pleased. I'm quite pleased, and I was quite surprised to see that you asked me to come here 40 years after. You were lucky at my age, you know.